Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavors of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your technical questions answered, and contribute to the community forum. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our construction tech or weekly Global Passive House Showcase webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast.
Welcome to the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland in New Zealand.
And I'm Zach Semke, coming to you from Seattle, Washington on the Salish Sea.
It's nice. It's quite calm weather here at the moment, but we are bracing ourselves for a cyclone, possibly.
The calm before the storm, but right after you just got walloped by a huge rain event too.
Yeah, rain event, which is already looking like a larger insurance total bill than the Canterbury earthquakes over a decade ago. Probably just because of the number of houses and the size of the population here, and
right.
There's, some of those houses are in pretty quite nice what were quite nice places with views, which tend to be on high ground above water, and have been very prone to slips, and then there are other places at the other end of the scale that have suffered a lot of flood damage, and that's going to carry on for a while. That's sort of drops off the news cycle, but there's a lot of people out there that I think are going to have quite long processes of discussing with insurance companies and massive disruptions of having to move out of their house and then organise getting things rebuilt and replacing all the damaged furniture. It's just a really massive event in someone's life.
Yeah, no kidding. Your house is such an important thing. It's just very disruptive.
Yeah. We'll see how things track. Literally, there are lots of people watching this thing develop over in the sort of north of New Zealand and in the Pacific, and modelling its path and keeping a very close eye on where it does track and where it makes landfall, if it makes landfall in the top of New Zealand. So scheduled to be here around Sunday our time, so around about when this podcast comes out. So we'll see how things go.
Yeah, we'll be pulling for you all.
Yeah, thank you. All right, well, we've got a great interview to get into this week with someone from my hometown again, from South Australia, up in the hills in Adelaide. But before we get into that, a little bit of news. But perhaps we should thank our sponsors before we get into that as well. Do you want to give a quick shout out to our supporters?
Absolutely. A big thank you to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxt Ingui Architects, Glavel Foam Glass Gravel, Minitaire All-in-One HVAC and Dehumidification Units, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, Rockwell North America, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. Also, thanks to our champion sponsors, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, Proseco, and Source 2050. And thank you to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority.
So I just checked my Google alert for Passive House and got a notification that the world's first Passive House hospital has just opened. That's
very exciting. And I think it's going to feature prominently at the International Passive House Conference, I believe, in Wiesbaden on March 10th and 11th.
Well, as it should, because this is in Frankfurt, which is not far from Wiesbaden. It's just kind of a very short train journey if you happen to be on a fast-moving German train. So this project, I remember this being talked about quite a while ago, because it's a pretty big project, as any hospital would be. 79,000 square meters, the cost of 260 million euro. It's going to have space for up to 675 beds and also 4 places for a day clinic. And it's quite exciting, because it is the first full passive house hospital and clinic to be certified. And that I can imagine that in the detail there's quite a lot of complications, and it'd be really interesting to dive into that particularly around things like air tightness and ventilation, and also all the a hospital is one of those places where you do really need to keep things at a constant temperature and control the humidity. So it absolutely makes sense, but I can imagine there'll be some technical challenges in achieving that. Some of the results, what this article is saying about the efficiency of the building is that the typical consumption for this type of building, built sort of mid last century, the estimate would be around 500 kilowatt hours per square meter per year. And the design of this one is predicted to be around 150 kilowatt hours per square meter per year. And that's including all heating, cooling, hot water, electricity, and ventilation. So a massive saving. They're saying that it cost around which sounds pretty big, of 260 million euros. It was about 6% additional cost to get it to passive house. So a little bit of a bigger upfront investment, but with significant ongoing savings, and so hopefully better, healthier conditions as well, which is kind of what you want in a hospital.
No kidding. And for folks who are interested in hearing from the designer of this hospital, back in episode 40, we did an interview. Mary James and Ilka Cassidy did an interview with Petra Werner, Werner Traxler Richter, the architecture firm that designed this hospital. So we'll include a link to that in show notes, so you can check that out. That was a interview back in May of 2021, and they had just passed their air tightness test at that point, and had a 0.13 air changes per hour at 50 pascals. So well below the necessary threshold, beating the necessary threshold by a significant margin for passive house certification.
Nice. Yeah. So looking forward to hearing more about that, but interesting and worthy to note that it's just opened.
Yeah, no kidding.
All right. Well, let's get into this week's interview. So back this side of the world, I caught up with Jessica Allen a couple of weeks ago. Jessica lives in South Australia, where I grew up, and it now works alongside Jackson Digney. Now, Jackson hasn't featured on the Passive House Accelerator before, but he probably should. I've caught up with Jackson when I've visited my parents back in Adelaide, and he lives up in Harndorf in the Adelaide Hills, and has built a couple of passive houses in Adelaide. And that's quite a significant thing, because Adelaide is a very temperate climate. It's quite warm. So convincing people that air tightness is a good thing in those conditions is not necessarily easy. And it's very much right at that early adopter stage still in that part of the world. So it's really cool to see Jackson now with a couple of homes to show people. I think they've got a show home now as well. And it's a common story where a builder embraces passive house in a market where there aren't many suppliers of wraps and high quality windows and things like that. And one thing leads to another, and Jackson realised that it's easier for him just to start bringing that stuff in and making it available to the rest of the market. And that's how Climasure was born, to provide some of those products, but also the expertise into that local market in South Australia. And that's where Jessica comes in. She is the technical manager of Climasure, and she's very passionate about education as well as serving that growing market and building interest in all things passive house, air tightness, and high performance building. She is a passive house designer herself, and has a lot of experience in the sustainability and energy efficiency field, and also kind of like myself is interested in the health of buildings as well. So anyway, like I said, I caught up with Jessica and asked her sort of how she got into this field. So I hope you enjoy this, and we'll catch up after the show, after the interview. All right. Well, good to chat, Jessica. I have I always like talking to people in South Australia, having grown up there. I feel very attached to the place. Can you give us a bit of an idea of where you are and what it's like?
Hi, Matthew. How are you going? Thanks for having me. I am currently based in Adelaide in South Australia. So the office that I work in is in the hills, the Adelaide Hills in Harndorf, which is a cooler climate than the Adelaide Plains. Where I live is on the Adelaide Plains near the coast. So at the moment I think it's about 32 degrees today and sunny. There's no wind.
Which is pleasant. But warm.
Oh, it's very pleasant. Very pleasant, but warm. It's been very, very windy the last couple of days. So Adelaide's quite variable. You know, we can have 4 seasons in one day here, as you would know. So, you've always got to take, your jacket and a brolly just in case the weather turns or if you go out.
But you can also, this time of year, midsummer, you can also stay above 30 all night long and get up to 40 during the day and get quite unbearably hot.
I can recall a couple of nights where it was sort of 35, 40 degrees at midnight. That doesn't happen too often, though.
Yeah.
It usually gets, if it's going to be a really scorching hot day, it's usually mid-20s during that overnight, which is still uncomfortable to sleep in.
Yeah.
Those extreme overnight temperatures.
Yeah. The other defining feature, I guess, is the dryness.
Yes.
Really, really dry. Do you know what the average rainfall is there? I just remember it being very, very low.
Yeah, well, I looked up some bomb stats today, just this morning, just to sort of get some information. And it says 36 mil is the average rainfall across the year. Does that sound about right to you?
360 mil.
The numbers I've got are 36 mil per month. So that's per month, not annually. It's about 400 mil a year.
Yeah,
it's about 400 mil a year,
which is staggeringly low. We get that in a day. Where I am here in Auckland, 36, 40 millimeters. Yeah. And I guess as well as that rainfall, the relative humidity is also generally pretty low. It's not tropical heat. It's pretty dry conditions because you're right next to a big desert basically.
That's right. We get all of that dry wind from up north. The relative humidity is only about 60-65%. So yeah, it is pretty dry here.
Yeah.
Go for a run and your throat's like
Yeah.
people here can't
Um,
handle humidity.
And so Adelaide is home. Is it always? Did you grow up in Adelaide? You come from there? Come from South Australia?
Yeah, I was born here. Lived here for the first 10 years of my life with my family, and then we moved around a bit with my father's work. He was a civil engineer, and he worked for a number of years up in Queensland, up far north. And so I've lived in a few Queensland towns, central Queensland, up in the tropical north for a little while, central Queensland as an adult with my own family, and now back in Adelaide. We came back to Adelaide, and we've been based here for quite some time now, just to be near everyone else.
Yeah.
So yeah, Adelaide is home, but I have moved around a bit.
And what do you tell people when they ask you what you do?
I actually find it a little bit hard to explain, because I can't just say I'm a lawyer and everyone knows what that is. I sort of say I've sort of whittled it down to I consult on high performance building. That's about as succinct as I can make it, without going into detailed explanations about airtightness.
And is there generally a follow-up question to that? The people want to know what a high performance building is, or they just
no?
Do they walk away?
Oh, that's interesting. Blank. Mostly. That's cool. Yep.
What does that mean for you in the context of where you are in South Australia? How would you define a high performance building?
Anything above building code right now is high performance to the public here. I worked for a number of years in building code compliance, energy modelling, and I've seen firsthand the weaknesses in the modelling and the weaknesses in translation to site and knowledge gaps and all sorts of things, which is why I am working in this space, the passive house high performance space now. So I think anything that is over and above what the building code requires, is considered high performance. People think that,
which is a relatively low
6
bar.
stars is high performance. Yeah,
that's a pretty low bar in terms of the Australian building code.
It is,
from what I understand of it.
It is, but correct. The Australian building code is working hard. The last iteration from last year will come into play in September this year, after its transition period. And there have been some major changes in the residential code, this code change, but there are still a number of gaping holes. And the biggest change, I think, is the condensation stuff. We're finally paying attention properly to condensation management, and builders are being held to account for that. So it's a big step forward, but there's still a big education gap as to what that actually means.
Well, we'll get into that, but first of all, I want to go back a step and talk about how you got into being a consultant for high performance building. How did that come about?
Well, I have been around, as I mentioned, my dad was a civil engineer. I've been around engineering and construction my whole life. I didn't actually take this path. I didn't turn it into a career until after I had my children. So I was a late starter. I thought I might like to design houses. So I started a diploma of building design here in Adelaide about 10 or 11 years ago. And then the first sustainability subject I hit changed my trajectory completely. I stopped caring about how buildings looked, and my main concern was how they worked. So from there, I got a job doing the energy modelling that I mentioned. I did that whilst I was studying and had my family. And then came air tightness, and then came passive house. So,
Right.
I had sort of got to know how the energy modelling for the building code here worked.
Yeah.
And became I wanted better. You're gonna, there was a better way to do it. If you get it right at the start, then it just seemed to me to be, if you have the knowledge, then you can get it right to start with, instead of doing the absolute minimum and thinking that that's enough.
I'm guessing air tightness wasn't a major part of your diploma course.
Not at all. I came across air tightness testing because somebody I worked with did it, and as soon as I found out what he was doing, I said to him, I want to help you. And then he left the company, and there's a couple of changeovers, but then I ended up with the service as my main responsibility in that role.
And was that something that
was
that something that you had to push for, or was it being asked for?
Probably a bit of both. There's definitely, although the majority of the industry, majority of the construction in Australia and in South Australia is building code only, building code level minimum compliance. There is a sect. There's there is a pocket of the industry that does want high performance. And there's not that many people providing these sorts of services, particularly air tightness testing. So those that want it know who to come to.
Right.
And so there is an influx of work that comes in without us going and looking for it. But there's a large element of preaching to the choir in this high performance industry. You've got all these people that love it and want to talk about it. That's great, but they're already on board. There's it's the rest of the industry that you want to talk about it with. So, when I tell people what I do and they just kind of go blank, it's a real indicator as to what the level of knowledge is out there. And you can't do better if you don't know better. I try to encourage those sorts of conversations.
And how does that generally go? Because as we talked about, it's relatively pleasant for a good chunk of the year in Adelaide and around South Australia. So how do you convince people that it's worthwhile keeping the outside and keeping the inside more controlled?
That is a challenge. I've had conversations with people who are high up in this industry, and they look at me blankly when we talk about double glazing, and they say, "Why would you double glaze a window if it's going to be open?" And it's such a common question. People are like, "Why would I have an airtight house? I want to hear the birds outside." So it's a frustrating conversation to have. And the fact is, you're not really catering to 50 or 60% of the year that's pleasant. You're catering, or whatever the percentages are, you're catering to the extremes. You're catering to the really cold nights and the really hot days, which are very uncomfortable. And heat waves here in Adelaide, 40 degrees for 3, 4, 5 days in a row. They are dangerous to some people. So it's not about whether or not it snows. If you're in the Adelaide Hills, it is freezing if your house is not well insulated and it's leaky. If you're got a western facing coastal house at 4 o'clock in the height of summer, it is roasting. We still get really uncomfortable here, and there's a lot of we get the really hot and the really cold. Here in Adelaide. So there are plenty of extreme conditions here that require much better performance housing in order for occupants to be comfortable.
And are those situations, is that a case for air tightness, or do people see that as a case for better insulation and big air conditioning systems?
They think it's air conditioning straight away.
Right.
And yes, straight away I overheard not even work-related conversations. I was at a friend's party and they were, "Oh, it's been so hot," and air conditioning, because they don't, like I said before, if they don't know better, they can't do better. There's no sort of understanding that you can actually make a building perform better by building it better. There's solar panels and air conditioning is the solution. that most people go straight for. So it's just the status quo, really.
Are there limits to what air tightness can achieve, though, in that type of environment? And I guess by extension, passive house, it is a warm climate. Still, you have those cold conditions as well. But there are predominant these long periods of when it is quite warm and uncomfortably, dangerously even hot.
Yes, correct.
Are there limits to what air tightness can provide in those circumstances?
I think there are limits, of course. Air tightness is one element. It's the basis of all high performance housing, as you are well aware. If you don't have an airtight home, it doesn't matter how well you insulate it, you're going to be, the inside temperatures are going to be compromised.
Yeah.
So air tightness is one of the things that needs to be done properly. There's 5 pillars of passive house. They are applicable to all housing, not just passive certified passive houses. And air tightness is more. Air tightness is actually, in my travels, I found it's equally about controlling air temperature as it is about health, or probably more about health. So it's about controlling the indoor air quality, the humidity, and the health of the building itself, as well as the health of the occupants. Making sure that indoor humidity and relative humidity and dew points are controlled. Along with all the other elements of insulation and thermal bridging and whatnot. It's like a recipe. It's one element of a recipe.
Yeah. So tell us a bit about Climasure. What is Climasure and what do you get up to?
The Climasure is primarily we sell ProClima building membranes, for the ProClima membranes for residential and commercial construction. The company was started a few years ago by a gent named Jackson Digney, and he owns Enduro Builders, who are a passive house builder in the hills. And he came upon.
We have spoken Jackson.
There you go. He's well known around Adelaide for what he does. He's the best at what he does in this part of the world, and he's very open with how much he shares his knowledge. We both go around visiting builders and showing them how to do what he does as standard. So Jackson started Climasure as his knowledge grew. Our knowledge of this air tightness and passive house stuff kind of grew concurrently. He was a client of mine in my old job, my previous role. And we were sort of learning at the same time, and he applied all of these principles to his building company. And once he came upon the ProClima membranes, he was like, well, I want more builders to do that, more builders to use these products. So I'm going to sell them. I'm going to become a distributor. And because he was very busy with Enduro Builders, he got me on board to run Climasure. So I brought all of my energy modelling and consulting, air tightness, hygrothermal analysis, all passive house, all of that interest, and then brought it over with me, and then we've grown it since I started with Jackson just over a year ago.
Yeah.
So
and so you say that you're selling and distributing, but I get the sense that it's more than just selling product.
Yeah, we're now. Before I came on board, there was certainly an element of consulting, but I think me coming on board has brought a much stronger consulting element to this company. So there's air tightness consulting, hygrothermal analysis, PHPP, and just passive design information, and anything that's thermal bridging analysis, anything that's building performance related, we can help with. So we're not just a distributor. Yeah, for sure.
It's super exciting that there is a market for that now, and even though it's small and there's a handful of people doing it, the fact that it's justified a position and to grow a company around that as a primary service is super exciting.
It really is. It really is, and there is, like I said, a pocket of clients who who really are, like, we've got some builders who only use the ProClimate membranes. They want to do the right thing from the start. They're high performance builders. And then we've got other clients that come to us who just want a house that's not passive house, but near passive house. They want a better performing building. And, it's always fun working with those people.
Well, it looks fun. You've got awesome posts, and people should check those out. It always makes good photos, putting a fan in a door and turning it on. But you've got some other great social media posts that I've seen over the last couple of years of visiting building sites. So you should definitely check those out. But tell me about the hydrothermal and also thermal bridging. Is that something that's growing in demand?
Yeah, so hydrothermal definitely, because that's just coming to the building code. So here in Australia, the condensation management clauses require a vapor permeable membrane in the colder climates. The newest iteration of the building code requires a vapor permeable membrane in the Adelaide Plains as well. I think it's from climate zone 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So we've got 8 climate zones, 1 through to 8. I'm pretty sure it's 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 now require a class 4 vapor permeable membrane to control condensation. And that's the DTS requirement. There's the performance solution that requires a hydrothermal assessment using a program called WIFI, which is a German program that's been used for 30 years over in Europe to determine a mold growth risk. It does other things as well, but we primarily use it here for mold growth risk. And you can model a wall or a roof system and sort of input climate data, input like the wall build up, any risk factors, orientation, blah, blah, blah. And it will give you a number between 1 and 6, and that is the mold risk. So in the building code, you have to receive a 3 or under in order to pass the performance solution. So if you can't prove that your wall or roof system has got low mold growth risk, you can't build it.
And will that be for all? Is that for all building types in those climate zones?
That is for all building types. No, only residential. And I think it's not required for apartment buildings yet. Class 2.
Right. But a class of building in those climate zones. Yeah, and that's pretty massive, right? I mean, that's a big change in the requirements of the building code. I mean, we talked about how it's a pretty low bar to be above the building code, but having that in there is a pretty significant achievement. I spoke with Jesse Clark last week, who I know has been instrumental in campaigning for about a decade now, just to kind of get those things into the building code. And that's also really exciting to see that sort of change at that level.
It really is. It's sort of stand up and take notice, same as the air tightness terminology coming into the code in 2019. Yeah, it's builders are on notice for sure that this building performance stuff ain't no joke, and they need to be aware. It's the challenge that I think they're coming up against is how they actually get the information. There's no CPD for builders or carpenters or plumbers, so they're finding out as they go. Hopefully, not when it's too late. When they're being
well. And the other thing that I talked about with Jesse last week was it's not just those builders and the designers, but it's also the consenting authorities and the councils and who are the regulators. And do you get a sense that they know what they're going to be looking for, or have any ability to check those standards?
Generally speaking, no. They don't understand energy. I attended a lecture at TAFE when I was doing my studies, and he was a certifier, and he got to the energy section of his talk, and he said, "Oh, this is a really specialised area. We rely on the consultants. So they'll get a report. They'll look at who wrote the report. They'll go, yep, I trust Matthew Cutler Welsh to do the right thing.
I wouldn't do that.
They rely on the consultants and the specialist knowledge around them. I don't. That is a generalization. There might be some out there who do get it better than others, but in my experience, generally speaking, the certifying authorities don't understand energy really at all, and it's complicated. It's complicated. It's not easy to get. It's and their main priority is making sure that a house doesn't fall down or burn down. Whether or not it's comfortable is lower on the priority list to a council or a certifier than it is to the occupant and the builder. So, yeah.
Where do you see things going from here? So that is some significant changes, but you still got some pretty big challenges. Cost of materials and shortage of labour and just changing economic demands. But where do you see things going, say, in the next 3 years in that higher performance building?
Where do I see it going? Where do I see it going, or where would I like it to go?
Where would you like it to go?
I think you can't put the cart before the horse. So I know this is a really slow trickle in this industry, so I don't have any huge expectations. But what I would like, and there's going to be another code change in the next 3 years as well. So it'd be good to see some form of mandated as-built audit process like air tightness testing. It seems like a no-brainer to use that. We just need more air tightness testers to do the work.
Yeah.
Or there's currently some movement in the NatHERS space where air infiltration targets are looking at being used in the models, energy models. So that's a verifiable outcome.
Yeah.
To verify that the house is actually going to perform the way it says it's, the designer says it's going to. The other thing I think I would really like to see is better sort of awareness at the education level for designers and architects. So, you get architects coming out of uni who don't know anything about, they've done one subject on the orientation of the sun.
Yeah.
And that's it. So that I would like to see designers and architects have more integrated education on this stuff, whether it's passive house or floor testing or, anything really. I've been I've done a couple of lectures at TAFEs. I went to see the Adelaide University architecture director a few years ago. It's kind of hard to get into these spaces. Their programs are set, but it would be great to see students coming out of these institutions with a better understanding, and then that's where the information spread can really begin. Yeah.
Well, and you take your experience as an example. You hear something at the right time, and it changes the course of their career potentially if they can see that, hey, this is actually a better way and a verifiable way of proving that the quality of what they produce. So I think you're right. Education certainly a key element to that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of architecture students go into that because they're arty. They like pretty things. But I think it's still important that they understand how what they are designing actually functions when it's built.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You got some numbers there on passive house in South Australia?
Yes. So we have one certified passive house, and that was built it was over 10 years ago that house was built.
Yeah.
And nothing much has happened up until we've had a bit of a explosion, if you want to call it that.
A good explosion.
Of passive passive houses in the last 12 months. We've gone from one in the last decade to three more about to be sort of finished, about to be certified, and another one that's being built. That's in the sort of CBD Hills area. And then there's another one in Wallaroo that's just being started now. Their frames are going up this week, I think. And another one that's about to come across my desk for some modelling. So that's 4, 5, 6 or 7 passive houses going on at the moment in South Australia, which
is significant.
it's a small number, but it's significant growth in 1 year.
Yeah,
in a very short period of time.
And Adelaide's, it's not a massive place. It's not a Sydney or a Melbourne. That is significant. And underneath that, there'll be a lot more that are not necessarily certified, but are going down a sort of more airtight and higher performance, following the same strategy, but maybe not just getting official certification.
Yeah, there's lots of that. Every house that Jackson builds with Enduro Builders, every house that team builds is high performance.
Yeah.
And there are a couple of other builders in Adelaide that we work with that are the same. So, the high performance industry is certainly alive and well.
Yeah. That's awesome.
And, I plan to do my part to keep it all humming along. And
I'm sure you will. And, Jackson deserves a lot of credit for that, we talk a lot on the show about the value of sharing that knowledge and seeing colleagues as just that, and rather than competitors, and sharing that information with other builders, I think is proving that it's a successful strategy. You don't have to keep all this stuff to yourself, because there's more than enough to go around, and having other people do buildings to a similar standard is beneficial for everyone. So, I really appreciate Jackson's efforts in that space. Doing simple things like inviting people around pre-lining, so they can see that all the membranes up and see how well it's performing at that sort of partial complete stage. I think is a really powerful marketing tool as well as an education tool. So and to you as well. I think the stuff that you're posting does help to spread the message, and I think it's great, the work that you've been involved in. So thank you. Keep up the good work.
No worries.
I look forward to seeing more posts.
No worries. Thanks,
and hopefully next time I'm in Adelaide, I'll get to go and visit a few certified passive houses.
Yeah, do it. There's we've got enduros at the minute, and there should be a few more. So you're welcome anytime.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Jessica. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
And that was Jessica Allen, who is the technical manager of Climasure, based in South Australia. What do you think, Zach?
It was excellent. It was a great kind of 1-2 punch from Jessie Clark a couple episodes ago, and now Jessica Allen. And I recall Jessie talking about that journey that started from kind of his recognition that there's this cascade of intervention in buildings, right? That starts with insulation, and then to moving to air tightness, and then to vapor and moisture management. And his talking about, the work in Australia on the Australia Building Energy Code rules, where, he, thanks in part to his advocacy work there, the building code in 2019 engaged with air tightness. And now the next step is to work on moisture management and condensation. And then the very similar kind of story from Jessica, where she's, starting with designing buildings, thinking about the way that buildings look. And what did she say? She said she stopped worrying about how buildings looked and started caring about how they work.
Yeah.
And so that moved her to energy modeling, and then this introduction to air tightness, and then to passive house. So it's obviously kindred spirits there, those two.
Yeah. And we have this thing, we've talked about NatHERS quite a lot, and the National Home Energy Rating Scheme. And that's where a lot of people start out because it's required now. But then people, once they dive into that, and if they've done any energy modeling outside of that, or get into any building science, they sort of, it's pretty easy to get a little bit disappointed, I guess, by the rigor of NatHERS. I mean, it serves a purpose. It's not easy to have a system that was required for all housing that's going to be really, really robust. But people, if they learn about building sites, they really want to get into more detail, and it's they lead to things like the HPP and passive house. And as you say, that then there's this growing frustration about how far behind the National Construction Code, the NCC in Australia, and likewise here in New Zealand. Our New Zealand Building Code, just they're fairly archaic in terms of some of their requirements. Jesse Clark has made a lot of progress in that area, and it's a relatively small network. I've seen plenty of social media posts of Jessica Allen heading along to the Building Physics Forum and catching up with people like Jesse and Sean Maxwell, Dan Jacobs, who Air Tightness, Air Boss Dan, who's a great person to follow on Instagram and around social media, who's a amazing German carpenter traveling around Australia teaching people how to do air tightness, which is similar to what Jessica Allen does. She's also definitely worth checking out on Instagram on Climasure and on social media channels. Does some great posts of all the houses she visits and various air tightness tests that she's around for. And it's really great to see that starting to take off in South Australia, where it's still just very early days in that journey.
Yeah, I was struck by this requirement that is being applied to more and more buildings in Australia. It sounds like demonstrating low mold risk, and that score around mold risk, and the use of hygrothermal analysis and WUFI. I mean, those are important steps, and ones that I think that Washington State Energy Code could learn from. It's while I know it's frustrating, there's also that's a big deal.
It is a big deal. It's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. I mean, it's really impressive to have the actual end goal as the requirement there, which is the reduction of mold risk,
right,
as opposed to saying you have to have R3 in your walls or R6 in your roof. A very prescriptive method. It's more, well, this is how it has to perform. You need to demonstrate that this is not going to happen. Now, there's definitely some hooks in there, particularly with all the variables that there are in WUFI, and that's something that those involved with things like the Building Physics Forum are really pushing the industry to have standardization around the assumptions that you make when you're doing WUFI models, because that's the only way to get consistency. Otherwise, if there's a risk there that if a designer or a building owner doesn't like the result, they just go to a different energy modeler until they get the result that they're after. It's still early stages in that industry, and there's a lot of work to be done to educate, but also to standardize and make those protocols consistent across all energy modelers, so that we're getting some good results. But it's a really positive step. It's really great to have that acknowledged. And the other thing I really liked about that is that it really highlights the health aspect of why it's important to design well, because the energy savings is there. It's really important, but it's never going to be as significant as Europe or North America, where you're getting months of near 0 degrees Celsius, and there's this, you're trying to wean off. Australia, they do have coal for a lot of their energy supply at the moment, but there's just not as much of a driver for pure energy efficiency savings. So I think having that emphasis on health and reduction of mold is a really positive step.
That it was just a little teaser. I just recently had the chance to interview Dr. Wolfgang Feist, the founder of Passive House Institute, which was a real privilege. And one of the things we were talking about was for people to maybe not prioritize energy efficiency, and wondering why aren't we more, why can't we be even more successful at kind of elevating energy efficiency. And I was talking about, well, there's that notion of negawatts that never really caught on, that Amory Levins coined that term. So the notion that there are these energy services that energy efficiency provides. So maybe because it's not a less than, but it's like, this is a positive thing. And he Wolfgang said something to the effect of, yeah, but it's not really the right way to think about it, because we shouldn't think of energy efficiency as competing, for example, with solar energy or the other forms of clean energy, but instead be thinking about the more holistic human benefits of building better. And so I think it gets to exactly what you're saying there about, and this, it's not, leading with health and the building durability, increasingly climate resilience and human health. All those things are special benefits that better building brings.
I look forward to that one. It's going to be good in the lead up to Passive House conference in Germany.
Yeah, it's so fun.
Is Wolfgang going to be there?
I believe so. I actually I didn't ask him. I just made the assumption that he'd be there, but he has made this shift, which we touch on a little bit, where he's handed the leadership reins to a team of managing directors there. So he technically doesn't have to be. I can't imagine him missing that conference. He'll be there.
No, not when it's close by, because a lot of the workshops are in Darmstadt as well, the day prior to the conference as well. So it's all pretty close. Awesome. So we've got that coming up. Any other items that we got coming up, events?
So on the Passive House Accelerator Live program this coming week, we have a project showcase edition of the show. So it's going to be the Fifth Street Passive House Modeled and Measured Performance. This is a project in Boise, Idaho, designed by Scott Wybar for Skylar Swinford and kind of GC'd, I think, by Skylar. It's his own house. Really interesting data that they'll be sharing about the modeled and measured, and where it matched and where it didn't, and why. And then, so that's on February 15th in North America, really early in the morning, February 16th for you. And then on February 22nd, we have a construction tech edition of the show, and it will be Six and Kane, the first EnerFit Plus certified commercial building in the United States. And that's presented by Norm Horn and Gary Mosier. And then we alluded to the Passive House, the International Passive House Conference in Wiesbaden on March 10th and 11th, with project tours on March 12th. We are going to be there, Matthew and I and Mary and Michael and Ilka and Jose Sosa, the host of the 101 show, will all be in Wiesbaden. We'll be doing a bunch of podcast interviews there. So I want to give a shout out to the folks who are underwriting that series and making it possible. So a big thank you to Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, Innotech Windows, and ProClima. And also, we are co-hosting the Passive House exhibition party along with Passive House Institute at the conference. And that is being underwritten by generous support from Rothoblas USA and Enersign. There's also the FIAS Retrofit Summit that happens later in March. So we'll do a link to that as well in show notes. And we're going to be producing, that's a 3-day event. The Tuesday and Thursday evening events are produced by FIAS. And then we're doing a kind of tag-along Wednesday evening event produced by Passive House Accelerator in partnership. I think that's it for now.
It's a lot. And how those new format lives going?
Oh, they're going really well, really, really well. It was really fun, for example, to see the 101 session that Michael Ingwe did, 10 steps to designing your first passive house. We had an audience of 250 people there, and awesome. lots of new folks. People posting on Instagram of photo of their office watching in the conference room. So I think that I know the change has not been great for folks down under, so apologies for that. But we are recording everything.
That's right. Right. You can always catch up.
Yep.
Yeah. Very good. All right. Well, thanks for that. Lots coming up. Definitely check all that out. Don't forget, you can always sign up and see either those recordings, but also sign up for the newsletter so you stay in touch and up to speed with everything at the Passive House Accelerator. And we'll be back again next week on the Passive House Podcast.